The white media has two narrative templates, one for white people and the other for everyone else. Let's look at two recent examples. The first one happened in Las Vegas on May 5th. I'm going to detail this the way the white media did. Two people were shot outside of a Las Vegas daycare. Their two children were also injured. That is all. Story after story from all the news media sources talked about it as if these people were killed by some anonymous third party. For over a day, they just cut and paste the same pointless headline, treating a major story like a non-event. The white media simply gives that sterilized headline and moved on as if there was nothing else to see, because they would like the public to have done exactly that. This was supposed to be a cover their behinds story so they could print it, move on, and nobody would be able to later accuse them of not having reported it. The police also made it clear that they weren't giving out the victims' identities until after the relatives of the deceased had been notified. They don't give any information about the shooting. Was it drug-related? Was it terrorism? Two people shot, kids injured, and the cops have nothing to say? Nothing at all? Well, as we all know, when the white police and white media make it clear they're not giving any details about a shooting, that's a damn near guaranteed red flag. The shooter is white, and the white media is circling the wagons to protect the myth of the law-abiding white citizenry. 24 hours after the killing, the family of the dead woman identified her to the public, and this helped to identify the man who died as well, because he was the one who murdered her. Christina Pearl Franklin brought her kids to daycare when her ex-husband, Travis Lee Spittler, came there and shot her to death. He also injured their two children as well, but their injuries weren't life-threatening. The news accounts attempt to sanitize this fact by downplaying it, but the fact is these two children were nearly murdered by their own white father. Having murdered the mother of his children and wounded his own kids, Spittler then took his own life. Now, the white media might have gotten away with burying the story here, except things got more interesting. Because it turns out this woman had been brutally assaulted by this man before and was trying to get him put in prison. On May 3rd of this year, only a few days before the murder, Spittler was dragged into court on charges of domestic battery with substantial bodily harm, forgery, and preventing or dissuading a person from testifying. This stemmed from a December beating he put on his ex-wife. The judge, however, claimed that there was no indication given that he had threatened her or that he had been a threat to her, even though she testified that he beaten her bloody while telling her, "I hate you, you're an effing B, I'm going to kill you." I guess when the defendant is white, that doesn't qualify as a threat. The prosecutors told the judge to deny Spittler bail, but he's white and hence not a real threat, so the judge said let him go, and she felt it sufficient to give him a stern talking to in court. I'm not making that up, by the way. Before letting Spittler go, the judge simply said, "You're to have absolutely no contact, zero contact whatsoever with her. If you violate that, then you will find yourself back in the Clark County Detention Center with no bail. Do you understand?" Spittler even went so far as to forge false subpoena papers against his ex-wife in a feeble attempt to manufacture a contempt of court citation against her. Now, any one of these charges would have had a black man behind bars until well after a not guilty verdict, even without a lick of evidence. This is what a white man did to his white wife, and about all she could get was a temporary restraining order from a judge who couldn't care less. And a white female judge, no less. Now the question becomes, why on earth would the judge ignore all this? And then after he kills his wife and attempts to kill his own children, why would police want to conceal it? Same as in Pike County. 8 white people dead, and the cops were bending over backwards to not have to say a word about it. Dylan Roof was arrested for drug possession and trespassed from a mall, but nothing was done to him. George Zimmerman assaulted a cop in 2005 as well as his ex-fiancée and has numerous public complaints against him before he murdered Trayvon Martin. Daniel Pentalio had to settle 2 lawsuits for racial profiling and police brutality before he murdered Eric Garner. Christopher Q goes through a revolving door at the courthouse where he assaults people, gets out, and does it all over again. All these killers and thugs have numerous criminal offenses before they kill. There's no denying that these guys were setting off all kinds of red flags. There's no reason any of them should not have been in prison. Well, that is to say, if they were black, there wouldn't have been a reason. If Travis Spittle's name was Trayvon, he wouldn't have been able to kill his ex-wife because a mere accusation alone, not even of violence, merely of some sort of unspecified wrongdoing, would have been sufficient for prosecutors to charge him with a hard felony and for a judge to demand that he be held without bond. The prisons are full, mostly with black men, and most of them there for non-violent charges. Meanwhile, the white males are beating their wives to death, forging documents, peddling drugs to the public, or, in the case of Michael Slager, being caught on video gunning people down, and they're still free and walking the streets. Why? Because concealing white criminality is the foundation of the white rationale for using the police to attack black people. The white media wasn't protecting this Travis Lee character. They were protecting themselves, protecting their own white privilege. Because you cannot justify racial profiling or disproportionate sentencing of black offenders versus the wholesale legal immunity white offenders get unless you create a myth that whites are unusually law-abiding while black people are not. But the daily reality refutes this entirely. So instead, the white media suppresses any and all stories about whites who break the law. They keep the details as sketchy as possible. They sit on information as long as possible. The white media treats white criminals as if they themselves are victims of crime, when in fact they're the perpetrators. White victims of crimes could be the biggest drug dealers in the county. The media will still ignore it and focus on how terrible it was that they were killed. Meanwhile, they treat the black victims of crime like they're the perpetrators, and anything they can twist into a he deserved it narrative, they will. If you got suspended from school for tardiness back in the 7th grade, the white media will make that into a days-long headline. This is the media template they use for white criminals versus blacks accused of a crime. As we've detailed over and over, whites commit the majority of violent crimes in the United States, not because of poverty or social oppression, as we'll see in this case. So why are the majority of violent offenders also not the ones receiving the majority of police surveillance and not receiving the majority of prison time? All you have to do is look at who comprises the police, the prosecutors, and judges to learn the answer to that one. The police are the domestic enforcement arm of white supremacy. A huge part of white supremacy is that white people are free, and their definition of freedom means that the laws don't apply to them. But of course, the unspoken understanding of this freedom is that they have to accept that other whites are free to kill them with virtual impunity, because if you lock up one white person for breaking the law, you have to get them all. The white police know the white supremacist operating procedure better than anyone. They have to, since it's their job to enforce it. That means protecting the white people who kill other white people. Now, the second case study that we're going to examine comes from Philadelphia. A white race terrorist attacked a church over a seat. He claimed that one of the parishioners, who just so happened to be a mulatto, by the way, was making a disturbance, and even though the ushers had already resolved whatever dispute there was, the white race terrorist stormed over brandishing his gun and his concealed carry permit, which in this case was in the form of a badge. This white thug, like George Zimmerman, was playing out some cop fantasy, brandishing a firearm and acting like he was the police, in a church no less. Well, the young man, as anyone confronted by a gun-wielding thug would do, tried to defend himself. The white thug shot him twice. The young man died later at the hospital. And this is not the first time that this storm thug has done something like this. He told the police that he had brandished his concealed carry permit and gun before in other places, and that, as he saw it, this was his idea of how to de-escalate a situation. Despite accounts from over 50 eyewitnesses, the police waited 4 days before deciding that maybe shooting an unarmed man in a church was a chargeable offense. But all they're going for is voluntary manslaughter and reckless endangerment. Already the white authorities are beginning the process of pleading this murder down and setting the stage for letting this thug off the hook with some minor misdemeanors. So, how many of these mad dog killers are going to shoot up daycares and murder people in church before the white media decides that maybe there's a problem here? If black on black crime, which is far less common than white on white crime, gets so much of the media's attention, then why doesn't this? Why is the daily self-genocide of white on white violence not a major issue in the presidential races? Why is it not a major issue in the local, county, or state races? When will white legislators be made to finally answer for the laws they've written that allow white thugs to walk the streets with guns? When will white prosecutors be made to answer for not charging white offenders with the felonies they deserve instead of always downgrading the charges to as close to a misdemeanor as possible? When will white judges and their wannabes be indicted, disbarred, and imprisoned for refusing to give white offenders the maximum sentences their crimes merit? When will they be punished for aiding and abetting the murders of black people? These are race terrorists, wholesale ignoring the laws when it suits them and misapplying them to black defendants when it doesn't apply at all. I encourage the black men who watch my video essays to begin the work of being citizen journalists. Start a chronicle of white criminals. Since the media has refused to report on their daily law breaking, then we will. Go to your sheriff's websites and see who's been booked in county lockup and for what. Also, cross-reference that with your local news station and newspapers and see if they found the white suspects and defendants worth covering or if they ignored them. Telling the truth matters, because when we remain silent, we allow the white media to have a monopoly on what the public hears. The only reason there's heat on the police right now, the only reason thug was exposed as a racial code word, is because we made it our mission to elevate the debate and do it on our terms. My video on Peter Liang is among the most watched on YouTube. What I said about that case has been repeated by Akai Gurley's supporters in New York. We have the power to exercise disproportionate influence, but what we're missing is the will and the output. Begin the steady drumbeat that will add up in due time. The white media will begin to see that we're onto them and that a counter-narrative is building. You want to change the social discourse? Then that requires that you begin speaking up. And before you try to say it doesn't matter, my question to you would be, when the hell have you ever tried? I don't mean post one or two comments on a message board. I mean, when have you put forward a full court press? When have you produced a daily, relentless, steady drumbeat, naming names, telling the crimes the powers that be commit daily in the legislatures and the courts? Too many black men are looking for an excuse to continue doing nothing, and that is not acceptable. Never has been. Just last week, the corrupt FBI director was caught complaining that the police are intimidated by cell phone cameras. We know what Comey is doing. He's floating a trial balloon. He's hoping that as FBI director, if he speaks out against cell phone cameras, this might influence Congress to start kicking around the idea of passing some sort of federal statute criminalizing videotaping the police. These types of laws have already been proposed in some cities, and even at the state level. We've got the bastards on the defensive, and it's our duty to keep them there. There's video cameras at the police station, video cameras on the streets, video cameras in every place of business and government office, video cameras in the police squad cars, body cameras on the police themselves. None of those cameras are a problem for the FBI. The federal government is appointing money for body cameras nationwide, and Comey didn't complain about that. But a camera in the hands of a black citizen, and all of a sudden, that's one camera too many. Because the white supremacists don't control that camera. That's why. Every time they pervert the course of justice to keep themselves out of prison, the worse they make it for themselves. Because people are seeing these cases play out and realizing the police and prosecutors are running an extrajudicial racket. When people see the police as an organized crime group, see the prosecutors as law degree wielding crooks, and the judges as legal whores, they no longer see these groups as legitimate. That means they don't see the laws and the corrupt people who they truly protect as legitimate. The enforcement arm of white supremacy absolutely requires that people see it as legitimate. This is why they put so much effort into the whole "it's only a few rotten apples" defense. Why every political whore from your local police chief to President Obama will boldly ignore the ton of dead black victims of police murders and instead pass bullcrap laws to protect cops who aren't even being threatened in the first place. It's a con, the same way white supremacy is a con. And they have to encourage, deceive, or coerce the public into playing along. That's what James Comey fears. That's what the white media is terrified of. It's about maintaining white supremacy. And that means keeping a critical mass of the public playing along with the lie that there's a system of law and order, when in reality it's a rotten system of white privilege held together by rampant cronyism and mostly white male entitlement. So the next time you hear about some people getting shot and the white media suddenly decides that they don't want to show their pictures, don't want to give details, and are refusing to tell you their criminal history, now you know why.